Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to another video, and welcome to the next part in my musicals versus the true story of series. You probably didn't even know this was meant to be a series, but like I've been working on this video since I finished the Lizzie Borden video, which was like March or something. Every time I sat down to research for this video, I would just fall down this wiki hole of Argentine history, and Argentina's history is so chaotic, and like I at one point had like 10 tabs open. I was just like so far down the rabbit hole that it was getting very hard to even make the script because I was just sitting like reading so deep into the history of the GOU and stuff. I love history, so but eventually I have managed to actually finish the script. So today I bring you Evita versus the true story of Eva Peron. So first off, a bit of background if you don't know what I'm talking about. By the way, I'm reading off a script. Sorry if I keep looking away from the camera, it's below. A bit of background if you don't know what I'm talking about. Evita is a musical written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice about the life of Maria Eva Duarte de Peron, or Eva Peron as she was more commonly known. It began its life as a concept album released in 1976 before becoming a West End show in 1978 and launched on Broadway in 1979. In 1996, a movie adaptation released starring Madonna, Antonio Banderas and Jonathan Pryce, and that's probably going to be my main reference for this video because it's the version that I know best. There are different lyrics depending on what version you're watching, as musicals tend to do. But I'm really working, the album I was listening to while writing the script was the movie cast album, so that's my main point of reference. But I tried to use like lyrics from the various versions just to try and like have the most accurate analysis. One of the things that's important to know about Evita before we even start talking about it is that the musical was based on a biography titled Evita, the Woman with the Whip. And it was written by Mary Main and published in 1952, the same year that Eva Peron died. The book was essentially seen as anti-Peronist propaganda and paints a very critical and disparaging picture of Eva Peron, and many Peronist supporters say the book is historically inaccurate, and there are definitely aspects of that book that are historically inaccurate that we can prove just by knowing anything about history, that what is said in the book isn't entirely correct. The issue here is, of course, is if you base your musical on a heavily biased and allegedly inaccurate account of someone's life, then your musical is also going to be heavily biased and inaccurate. And that's what we're going to discuss. Not long after The Woman in the Whip released, two authors came together and published Evita, The Real Lives of Eva Peron, which sought to correct the inaccuracies and allegations in the first biography. Also, after the release of the Evita movie, an Argentinian film was released called Eva Peron, The True Story, because Argentina wanted there to be a film that showed the Evita that they knew and loved. But who is this Santa Evita? Eva was the First Lady of Argentina and wife of President Juan Peron until her untimely death from cancer when she was 33 years old. During her time working in Argentine politics, she was president of both the Eva Peron Foundation, the female Peronist party, and had a considerable impact on life in Argentina. Just before she died, Eva was given the title of Spiritual Leader of the Nation by the Argentine Congress, a position which she technically still holds to this day because it's never been given to anyone else since. But I am getting ahead of myself. We're here to look at how Eva's life is portrayed in Evita, and to do that, we need to start at the very beginning with a song titled A Cinema in Buenos Aires, 26th July 1952 / Requiem for Evita.
It is my sad duty to inform you that Eva Peron, spiritual leader of the nation, entered immortality at 8:25 this evening.
The musical begins where Eva's story ends, with the announcement to the Argentine public that Evita had left her mortal coil and passed into the next world. The movie takes this time to show the incredible grief that consumed the people of Argentina at the time, as well as Eva's state funeral, all of which is accurate to the reality. After Eva died, the Argentine government put the country into a period of mourning. All official activities were suspended, flags were flown half-mast for 10 days, and as we see in the Buenos Aires cinema, all business was halted and everyone was asked to leave and go home. It was reported at the time that when Eva's body was moved from her home, 8 people were crushed to death in the crowds that lined the streets, and another 2,000 were treated for injuries. The streets of Buenos Aires were covered with piles of flowers, which caused all florist shops in the capital to run out of stock within a day of Eva's death. When Eva's funeral was held, nearly 3 million people attended, and a memorial was even held in Helsinki so the Argentine team who were there for the Olympics could mourn their spiritual leader's death. Eva's death was truly one of the biggest events in Argentine history, but not everyone believed the mourning was genuine. There were reports who called it a passion play of the Peronist regime, that the government was forcing the mourning and that people did not want to be seen as going against the president's orders, so they were egging it on, they were overreacting, that they didn't actually feel the pain that they were pretending to feel. And that, my friends, is where Che enters the picture.
Oh, what a circus, oh, what a show. Argentina has gone to town over the death of an actress called Eva Peron.
This is the first song in the show with lyrics, and it's performed by our narrator, who is named Che. Originally, the idea was that Che was Che Guevara, an Argentine Marxist revolutionary and guerrilla leader. However, nowadays the Che in Evita is simply an anti-Peronist member of the public. The reason for this is likely to be the fact that Che Guevara was not anti-Peronist at all. While Che and Peron did not agree on everything when it came to war and politics, they were actually supportive of each other. Che allegedly attempted to arrange for Perón to return to Argentina in the 1960s when Perón was exiled, and used his money to try and aid that purpose. Perón and Che met twice in Spain, and whilst the content of these meetings has never been made public, Perón's secretary Enrique Perea was present for the part of the second meeting and believes that Perón would have advised Che not to go ahead with his guerrilla plans in Bolivia, telling Che that it was suicide, and assuring Che that when he moved activities to Argentina, that he would have Peronist support. There is a surviving letter from Perón where he calls Che an immature utopian, but one of us, and I am happy for it to be so because he is giving these Yankees a real headache. Unquote. Which proves that Che was definitely not an opposing force in the Peron's lives. Thus, the Che in Evita really couldn't be Che Guevara. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, back to O What a Circus. Che begins the song by saying that Argentina has gone to town over the death of an actress named Eva Peron, which, for a start, is completely negating every role Eva's had in Argentina since she quit acting. He also states that the country is falling over itself to get all of the misery right, referring to this idea that the mourning was actually all for show and being forced by the government, that people were just playing a part. Che says that Eva's death is good for the country in a roundabout way, as it has made Argentina worldwide news. He also advises that you should demand to be buried like Eva Peron, which you could interpret to mean that he thinks that Eva demanded to be the centre of Argentina's attention when she inevitably died, since she pretty much knew that that was on the cards for her. In the next verse, Che is very sarcastic about Eva, calling her a goddess, and asking how Argentina will ever get by without her. Which, of course, he doesn't mean, because he doesn't support Evita. He goes on to say that Eva put on the best show in town, but now that it's over, everyone will see that she did nothing for years. Which is very much what Eva's detractors and the anti-Peronists believed. They felt that Eva was basically a showpiece, that she was just Juan's trophy wife, and she didn't really do anything to deserve the attention that she got, which is what that's referring to. Che then attacks the presidency, saying instead of government we had a stage, as in it wasn't actually a government, it was all just a big farce. It was a pantomime, essentially. We had a stage. And that Eva didn't say much, but she said it loud. All linking into this idea that Argentinian politics was just one big stage show, that it wasn't real. The statements Che puts across in Oh What a Circus are very aggressive and highly critical, just like Mary Main's book. The issue is that at this point in the musical, we don't have anything else to go off. This is pretty much the opening number of the show, and we don't know anything about Eva. If you don't happen to know anything about her outside of the musical, then all you're getting from the very start is that she was an actress, that she was, you know, she didn't do anything, that she wasn't the figurehead that she was supposed to be, which is already setting our opinion of how we're going to perceive Eva throughout the entire rest of the movie, because she is our narrator. He's our everyman. If he's telling us that Eva did nothing for years, then he must be right. And this already makes it very difficult to get through the rest of the show without thinking that Eva's one big sham, that she doesn't deserve the legacy that she has, which is not really setting off on a great foot in terms of trying to paint a realistic idea of Eva. If you open your show with a number which basically disparages her character through and through, you're not going to be in for a unbiased account of her life. And we definitely see that as the show goes on.
On this night of 1,000 stars, let me take you to heaven's door.
She begins this song by talking about how Eva had every disadvantage. She had no money, no father, and she'd never left her poor hometown of Junin. That is, she says, until she meets a tango singer by the name of Agustin Magaldi, who he claims is the first man to be of use to Eva Duarte. So let's talk about Agustin Magaldi for a minute, because he's a big character in this show, despite not really being a big character in the real life of Eva Peron. But since they dragged him into this story, I'm now forced to talk about him. So let's get into it. Agustin Magaldi was a tango singer and milonga singer who was known as, quote-unquote, the sentimental voice of Buenos Aires. One of his most significant feats during his life was taking part in the opening broadcast of Argentina's LOY Radio Nacional in July 1924. Sadly, his promising career was cut short when he died following surgery for liver disease in September 1938 at the age of 39. Magaldi's role in Evita is small and only lasts a few songs, but it facilitates the beginning of Eva's adult life as she moves to Buenos Aires and starts climbing the social ladder. But was Agustin Magaldi really that important to the life of Eva Duarte? Well, let's talk about that.
Seems to me there's no point in resisting. She's made up her mind, you've no choice. Why don't you be the man who discovered her? You'll never be remembered for your voice.
Despite there being an entire song titled Eva and Magaldi, the real answer is no. Magaldi was not a significant part of Eva Duarte's life. In fact, there are no records that Magaldi and Eva ever crossed paths at all in reality. And we're not talking about the 1600s here, we're talking the 1930s. There were photographs, reports, newspapers, and there's simply no evidence that Magaldi ever performed a concert in Eva's hometown of Junin that year, or that he ever met Eva at all. In fact, according to the records we do have, Magaldi was so devoted to his family that he brought his wife on tour with him, meaning it would be very difficult for him to have an affair whilst on the road. I think his wife would have something to say about that. In any case, according to Eva's sister, it was Eva's mother, Juana, who brought Eva to Buenos Aires so that Eva could start a career in radio. She was just a teenage girl with dreams of stardom, and she is not the first, nor will she be the last teenage girl who ever dreamed of that. The songs here recount the idea of Eva meeting Magaldi and starting an affair with him so that she could get to Buenos Aires, which is a story that comes from Mary Main's biography, The Woman with the Whip. It's a terrible image to paint of someone, in my opinion. For start, Eva was 15 at the time. In many places, that is still a child and definitely below the age of consent. To try to portray a 15-year-old girl as someone who would use a grown man, I can't understand the logic. If that really happened, if you found out a 15-year-old girl was sleeping with a grown man, the girl would be the victim in that situation. But for Mary Main, this was just another example of how Eva was this raging harlot who manipulated everyone. At 15, manipulating a grown man. What are we talking about here? If it did happen, it would be Magaldi who was in the wrong for taking advantage of a child, sexually abusing her, and then taking her away from her parents against their wishes. Literal kidnap. I don't know how you can frame Eva as the bad one in that situation. But of course, it's also a terrible depiction of Augustin Magaldi too, who, as far as I can tell, was a mild-mannered man who loved his family and never did anything wrong in his life. For Mary Main to portray him as this predator is just wrong. And of course, the fact that they dragged him into this musical has cemented this idea in people's heads that Eva really did have an affair with a married man when she was 15, which is just a terrible situation for both of them to be in, especially when neither of them were alive to defend themselves. It seems that Magaldi and Eva really never crossed paths, and this was all just a load of shit devised by Mary Main to disparage Eva's life further. And it's kind of depressing that that was the story that Webber and Rice decided to go with for the musical, since now everyone's got this idea in their head that Augustin Magaldi is a terrible predator womanizer who cheated on his wife with a child, and Eva is some kind of teenage harlot who manipulated a grown man in order for him to take her to Buenos Aires for free. It's not a good look. Anyway, back to the music before I get any more angry. So the song here shows Eva falling for Magaldi and saying she's going with him to Buenos Aires, whilst the townspeople chide Magaldi for his affair. There are a few interesting lines in here, such as, you must be quite relieved that no one's told the papers so far, which is likely a reference to the fact that there are no records that this thing ever happened. They're trying to say, well, no one told the papers, that's why you don't know anything about this. But of course the reality is no one told the papers because it didn't happen, did it? Magaldi also tries hard to convince Eva to stay at home, because he sees her as a one-night stand and doesn't really want to bring her to Buenos Aires because he has a wife and kids back home. There's one line in here that I always find sad, which is where one of the townspeople says, "Why don't you be the man who discovered her? You'll never be remembered for your voice." I have to say, the guy who sings it in the musical, like in the movie version, has a really nice voice, and I really like it, but it's a really sad line, because unfortunately, it's actually quite true. The majority of articles which exist about Augustin Magaldi talk mostly about his portrayal in Evita and his alleged connection with Eva rather than his actual music career. That said, there are recordings of his music you can find online, and I'm glad. He deserves to be remembered for who he was and the music he created, not the lies that someone wrote about him over a decade after his death. So if you've got time, go online and listen to the actual Augustin Magaldi, the one who's not played by Jimmy Nail. He did have a real talent, and it's a shame that he's remembered for something which didn't even happen. At one point during Eva and Magaldi makes a comment about if Eva was rich or middle class, to which she snaps, "Screw the middle classes, I will never accept them. My father's other family were middle class, and we were kept out of sight, hidden from view at his funeral." In the movie version, we get to see exactly what Eva is referring to here in an earlier scene with no songs. The real Eva Peron was born Maria Eva Duarte, or Maria Eva Ibarguren. I always struggle to say that. Ibarguren. Maria Eva Ibarguren. In May 1919. Her father, Juan Duarte, was a wealthy rancher with a wife and children, and her mother, Juana Ibarguren, was his mistress. When Eva was only a year old, Juan Duarte left Juana permanently to return to his wife, which left Juana and her children in poverty. The family faced stigma from society due to Juana being a single mother and her children being born illegitimate. Juan Duarte later died, and Juana brought her children to the funeral, which led to an argument breaking out at the church gates, as we see in the Evita movie. The family were allowed to pay their respects, but had to leave immediately after. This caused Eva to grow up with a dislike for those who were wealthy. She saw them as cold, uncaring people who abandon their families and prevent children from attending their father's funeral. These were the wealthy elite, and her only experience with them was them treating her like shit at her own dad's funeral. The pair of songs end with Magaldi telling Eva that he won't take her to Buenos Aires, but Eva sneaks on the train anyway, begins her journey to the Big Apple.
Stand back, Buenos Aires.
song is all about Eva arriving in Buenos Aires and declaring what a fantastic time she is going to have there. She's excited for stardom and celebrity and the nightlife and all of the new things she's going to discover in the big city. She says that Buenos Aires should be ready for her touch of star quality, whilst also commenting that she will have a lifetime of success and then she has other ways of paying her way. So make of that what you will. In the movie version, we have another suitcase and another hall in here, but I'm going to skip it because it's actually not an Evita song in the musical, so it's not really right to use it to discuss her because it's not her song. It's such a strange song because it's really popular amongst fans, but it only actually exists in the show to give Eva's actress a break before performing in New Argentina. So we'll discuss it when we get there.
Oh, but it's sad when a love affair dies, but we have pretended enough. It's best that we both stop fooling ourselves.
Which means
Following on from Eva's declaration in Buenos Aires that she will find ways of paying for herself, we get a better idea of exactly what she means in this song. The idea behind Goodnight and Thank You is Eva is sleeping with men in order to make her way up the social ladder and gain new opportunities. She even claims that Eva has a guest book at her door for all the men to sign as they leave. We also get to see a little of what Eva is doing career-wise now, which is TV commercials for soap and things like that. We also find out that as a result of her liaisons with the third man, Senor Jabon, Eva now has a spot on the radio as well, and by the end of Goodnight and Thank You, her career is off the ground and she is flourishing in her new life. In reality, Eva came to Buenos Aires with her mother Juana to attend an audition at a radio station and stayed with family friends while she was there. She attempted to make it as an actress but struggled due to her lack of connections and education. Her first role was in a play titled Mrs. Perez. She went on tour with a theatre company, did some modelling, had a few B-movie roles, and eventually in 1942, Candelas hired Eva to play a role in their daily radio drama Muy Ben on Radio El Mundo. This was what finally gave Eva her big break. She went on to sign a 5-year contract with Radio Belgrano and played various roles in the drama Great Women of History. By 1943, Eva was earning between 5,000 and 6,000 pesos a month, which made her one of the highest paid female radio actors in Argentina. Her success led to her becoming co-owner of Radio Belgrano, becoming a founder of the Argentine Radio Syndicate, and moving to the wealthy neighbourhood of Recoleta. As far as we can tell, there was no sleeping her way to the top. Eva worked hard for most of a decade, jumping at every opportunity that came her way in order to establish her career and achieve her dreams. So, again, a really disparaging song that completely overwrites the work that Eva actually put in and doesn't acknowledge that she was actually doing pretty well in her career. She wasn't just a hussy who got opportunities because she slept her way to the top. She genuinely did actually have a lot of work in her early years. But anyway, sit tight because this next song is when we start diving into the history of Argentina, which is where I ended up with so many Wikipedia tabs open and my brain short-circuited. It's a song called The Lady's Got Potential.
just one blast and the tear gas falls like rain. They haven't a chance. The terrorists advance, but one guy doesn't dirty his hands. Peron was biding time out in the slow lane.
This song paints a picture of the political landscape of Argentina at the time, and it was anything but peaceful. If I was going to give every detail of the 1943 Argentine coup d'etat, I would be here for hours. But I'm going to give you the info you need to understand the song, after I'd whittled it down from many, many Wikipedia pages. So the GOU were the Grupo de Oficiales Unidos, the United Officers Group, a secret society that formed in the Argentine army and launched a coup d'etat to overthrow President Ramon Castillo in 1943. The coup was brought on by what is now known as the Década Infame, the infamous decade, which began with the previous coup d'etat in 1930 to overthrow President Hipólito Yrigoyen. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. President Castillo was the fourth president to take the seat since Hipólito's removal from office, having been vice president to the previous president, Roberto Ortiz. Ortiz and Castillo stood on a platform of economic reactivation and ending the endemic corruption in Argentina. Ortiz had Argentina remain neutral in World War II, as they had done in World War I as well. Ortiz died in 1942 and Castillo took over, but Castillo was disliked by many in Argentina and abroad at the time, and so the GOU decided that he had to go. After a brief spell being ruled by General Arturo Rausen, General Pedro Pablo Ramirez was sworn in as president in June 1943. Ramirez's dictatorship was tough, limiting the freedoms of the people and repressing political and social groups. Many were arrested or forced into exile, organisations were dissolved, it was chaos. And watching all of this happen from his lowly position in the Department of Labour was one Colonel Juan Peron. There was a lot of complex stuff going on in the background involving Perón and the labour unions. The Ramirez government was not a fan of unions and created legislation so that the state had control of any unions that existed. He also forced many unions to dissolve. Explaining the background here would take ages, and to be honest, reading it reduced my brain to mush. So we're going to skip ahead and just say that Juan got caught up in a lot of union-related stuff at this point, and his alliance with the unions led to the first big division within the military. As a result, the military split into two groups, one led by Ramirez and relying on quote-unquote Catholic right-wing Catholic Hispanic nationalism, and one led by Perón and Vice President Edelmiro Farrell, which did not support Ramirez. This obviously weakened the Ramirez government and put Ramirez on the course to disaster when there were warring factions within his own ranks. It was during this time, in January of 1944, that the devastating San Juan earthquake occurred, as mentioned in the song. The earthquake claimed 10,000 lives, 10% of the population at the time. To this day, it's considered the worst national disaster in Argentine history. Perón was tasked with the fundraising efforts, which led to a charity concert where Perón invited as many celebrities as he could find in order to drive up donations to support the relief effort. And it was at this very concert where Perón, indeed, met Eva Duarte.
I stand here as a servant of the people, as we come together for a marvelous cause. You've shown by your presence, your deeds, and applause.
So this is one part of the Evita story that we can definitively say is total nonsense. At this point in the musical, Eva is at the charity concert and sees Magaldi on the stage performing on this night of 1,000 stars. She tells him that his act hasn't changed much, and he says that neither has hers. The scene is obviously here to show how much Eva has changed since she was 15 and how she did survive and become a star in Buenos Aires despite what Magaldi told her about the city and how it would eat her alive, blah 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 blah. There's just one problem. Augusta Magaldi died in 1938 and the charity concert took place in 1944. The real Magaldi had been dead for over 5 years at this point, so this meeting definitely did not happen. Now, it doesn't really matter because it's clearly just there for dramatic effect, but once again, I just find it bad that they took a real person and just destroyed his story so much that now they've got him appearing at things that he was literally dead at the time of happening. Like, Magaldi was a real person, and he had children, so he has descendants. This was the 1930s. Like, his descendants are alive. Stop doing this. This musical came out in the 1970s. It'd only been 40 years since Magaldi died. Like, his family would remember him. It just annoys me. And while we're on the topic, yes, I'm going to talk about Diana the musical. No, I'm not going to do a full deep dive because I don't actually think I could stomach it. Anyway, moving on. After Eva speaks to Magaldi, Perón gets up on stage and makes a speech about how he's a servant of the people, and I don't know if that's true to life or not. I don't know what speech he made at that concert. There's no records. She appears and goes on to mock the whole thing, because of course he thinks the whole thing is a load of shit, because that's what she does. And then we get to the important moment. 22nd of January, 1944, at the Luna Park Stadium in Buenos Aires. the night Peron first met Eva.
Please forgive me if I seem naive. I would never want to force your hand, but please understand I'd be good for you.
The idea behind this song is that Eva and Juan's interest in each other was purely strategic and not romantic. Eva tells Peron that she would be surprisingly good for him, meaning she would be good for his career, and Peron responds that he thinks that he would be good for her career too. This comes from this common anti-Peronist theory that Peron and Eva's marriage was entirely political and done to further their careers. Eva was a pretty young actress and Peron had ambitions to be president. Therefore, Eva would increase Peron's popularity and Peron would increase Eva's notoriety. This concept is brought up again later in the musical as of the 1966 movie in the song You Must Love Me. It's impossible for us to ever know if Peron and Eva got married out of political strategy or not. After all, they would never have admitted that even if they'd been asked. So this is purely speculation. If you ask me, I don't believe it was a marriage of convenience, and I'll explain why later on. I think there's a lot in the way that Peron talked about Eva, particularly after her death, that suggests that he really was besotted with her. I think Eva's detractors like to believe that Eva was incredibly manipulative and that there's no way she could have gotten a man like Juan Peron to fall for her without coercing him, when in reality they just met at a party and hit it off like countless other couples have done throughout history.
Hello and goodbye. I've just unemployed you. You can go back to school.
This song sees Eva throw Peron's previous mistress out of his house in a particularly scathing manner. She also implies that the mistress is still in school and that Peron was going through an adolescent phase. This is true to an extent. I can't find anything that says that Peron was dating a teenager when he met Eva, but he did have a teenage mistress after Eva's death. Her name was Nellie Rivas, and she was with Peron from 1953 to 1955 when she was between the ages of 13 and 16. And Peron was in his late 50s to early 60s, which is horrifying. He was actually prosecuted for his relationship with her, so there's that, but sadly Nellie and her whole family were arrested after Peron was overthrown and her parents were sent to prison while Nellie was sent to an asylum. So overall, not a great love story. And again, this girl was a literal child and she got sent to an asylum. Why? Why are we letting this shit happen? Anyway, Nellie did end up marrying someone else and she remained friends with Juan Peron for whatever reason, so I hope things did work out for her in the end after that ordeal, but Jesus Christ. Anyway, moving on. It's time for another suitcase and another haul.
So what happens now? So what happens now? Where am I going
You'll
to?
get by, you always have before.
Where am I going to? Don't ask anymore.
This is probably one of the most popular songs in the show, likely because Madonna got to sing it in the movie and she does an incredible job. But it's actually a song Peron's mistress sings in the stage musical. The song exists for the purpose of giving the actress playing Evita a few minutes to rest her voice before she performs A New Argentina, which is the most challenging song in the show. She can have a glass of water, do some vocal warm-ups, that sort of thing. And the actors have a chance to do their costume changes, and in the meantime, another actress can show off her pipes with one of the most beautiful songs on the show. I suppose within the narrative, the song exists to show how Eva's actions affect other people. And there's this teenage girl who thought she was going up in the world because she had Juan Peron, but now she's just been unceremoniously kicked out of her house, and as she says, what happens now? Where am I going to? It's a song without a huge amount of substance, but the lyrics are incredibly beautiful, and I've always been really attached to Call in 3 months' time and I'll be fine, I know, or maybe not that fine, but I'll survive anyhow. I won't recall the names and places of those sad occasions, but that's no consolation here and now. I sang that a lot after my dog died, which sounds a bit weird, but it's like, it's about knowing that even though you're in pain right now, in time the pain will subside and you will move on and you will be okay again. And that really stuck with me. It's an absolutely gorgeous song. It's just not got a huge amount of weight in terms of the actual show, but on its own, an incredibly powerful piece.
The evidence suggests she has other interests. If it's her who's using him, he's exceptionally dim. Bitch!
Perón's latest flame explains the attitude that certain areas of the Argentinian society had towards Eva. She says that the upper class didn't like her style, as they referred to her as a tart and lower class, which, of course, we know that Eva came from poverty and was illegitimate, so it's likely that people really did say that about her. She also mentions that the soldiers don't like Eva, and the soldiers say Eva should learn her place as a woman, i.e. that she exists to be a sex toy and a maid. She should know that she's not paid to be loud or to be laid. Slut is the words that they use. The whole song is offensive to women, with words like bitch and slut being thrown about, but that's the whole point. It's supposed to show how the world viewed Eva. That said, I'm not sure whether we're supposed to feel sorry for Eva, since the whole musical paints her as a villain. Like, I feel sorry for her in this song because I think what they're saying about her is absolutely hideous. But considering the way that she's been written, I'm not sure if we're supposed to side with the soldiers? I have no idea. Still, it's cruel. The officers in the song also suggest that Eva has other interests and that she's using Peron, which brings back this idea from I'd Be Surprisingly Good for You that the whole thing is a political compromise of some sort, you know, that it's strategic, that it's to further their careers, that Eva has other interests than just being with Peron. Or maybe they mean because they think that she has some kind of determination to take over the country, which is what people thought at the time, that Eva was with Juan because she wanted to be president. And of course, she was really close, but she didn't get there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It's also during this song that Eva reveals her intention to quit acting so that she can be more involved in politics. And from what I've read, Eva was never interested in politics before she met Peron. This wasn't some kind of life goal for her. However, Peron noted in his memoir that he saw Eva as a pupil that he could mould into another him. Thus, it was Peron who pushed Eva into politics by the sounds of it. It wasn't something she chose to do, like the song suggests, that she willingly gave up acting to pursue politics. It was something that Peron encouraged her to do because he wanted her to be more like him. Only 4 months after meeting Peron, Eva became the president of the Broadcast Performers Union that Peron organised. And from there, Eva created a radio soap opera which dramatised Peron's achievements and was essentially just really strong Peronist propaganda. What it did though was it spoke to the normal people who didn't listen to political campaigning. It reached a whole group of people who didn't pay attention to the politics. They didn't read the news. They didn't care about what Juan Peron was up to, but they liked radio dramas. And so from her creating this radio drama, suddenly she had reached a whole group of people who had never paid attention to Juan Peron before, but were getting really engrossed in this story they heard on the radio and were slowly moving towards being Peronists themselves, which was quite clever, if I do say so myself. And because of that, it was actually Eva's acting career that assisted Peron's political campaign. So rather than her quitting acting to pursue politics, she actually used her role as an actress to engage with politics, which is confusing, but as we just said, worked really well. We now move on to the big final number of the first act, A New Argentina. A New Argentina covers one of the most important periods in Juan Perón's life, the 1946 presidential election. And we're about to get into some deep history here again, so bear with us. In February of 1944, the GOU decided it was time to overthrow another president, and so they decided to force Ramirez out of the office. Ramirez tried to block this by demanding Farrell's resignation instead, but that didn't work, and Ramirez ended up tendering his resignation with a letter that Juan actually wrote himself, with Farrell taking over as the interim in February and permanently in March. Farrell was president and Juan was essentially his right-hand man, Minister of War and Labour, and one of the most powerful men in Argentina. This concerned his opponents, and in October 1945, Juan was actually arrested in an attempt to prevent him from trying to seize the presidency. A mass demonstration was formed to lobby for Perón's release, which soon turned into a violent riot. 6 days after his arrest, Juan was released, probably because they wanted to stop the chaos on the streets, and this was really the moment that Perón gained his dedicated following across Argentina. The following February, the 1946 general election was held. Perón was running for president against the Unión Democrática, which was essentially a joint force of everyone who opposed Perón. So your choice was Perón or anyone but Perón. Regardless of the many attempts by the opposition to expose Perón as a fascist, Juan went on to win the election and become president of Argentina. And the song shows the influence of Evita over the political campaign and Juan Perón himself. It really is about her and the influence she had over Juan's life during this time. The song begins with Perón lamenting how his opposition would like to see him 6 feet underground, suggesting that he had some concerns about the election and that they, might get killed by his detractors. Evita, on the other hand, is convinced that Perón is a shoo-in for the presidency. She believes that the nation's leaders are nothing when compared to the millions of descamisados across Argentina who are rooting for Perón. She also says that if Perón just waits it out, the nation will descend further into chaos and everyone will be desperate for him to take over and restore order. There's also a small moment where Eva says, you'll be handed power on a plate. Once again, this shows how Rice and Weber viewed Eva as this power-hungry woman who was using Perón for political clout, as the infamous biography suggested. Perón continues on with his concerns, saying that he could just give up and move to Paraguay instead, which Eva calls crazy defeatist talk, and says there's no risk to him as they have unions on their side, which they definitely did. She's right in that sense. The unions were Perón's largest asset during both his arrest and his campaign. It was the unions who lobbied for his freedom and the unions who shouted loudest during his run for office. However, the idea of Perón giving up and moving to Paraguay is an odd one. I don't really understand why Rice and Weber keep trying to make Perón seem a more honest and sympathetic character than Eva when he was literally a fascist dictator, and regardless of your opinions of Eva, Juan was far worse than she ever could have been. I can't find any suggestion that Perón ever considered giving up the presidency. He spent the past few years overthrowing everyone in office with the GOU. He wanted control and power. There is no doubt about it. He wasn't part of the GOU for nothing. He knew what he was doing. It's at this point in the song that Perón is arrested by his opposition and Eva is shown to be mobilising the unions to fight for his freedom. She uses her radio shows to broadcast her passionate speeches about Perón. She states that he supports the working class and he loves them. If he didn't, why would he marry a working class woman? This is accurate, as Eva did use her radio broadcast to campaign for Perón. However, how effective these speeches actually were is debatable. At this point, Eva was still not very popular with the public, or the unions, or Perón's inner circle. So the idea that she had enough clout to rally the entire country behind her partner is a bit of a stretch. The idea too that Perón must support the working class because he married Eva, a woman who had left her poverty-stricken life behind and become a fairly wealthy actress, is also a stretch. But that's politics for you. The unions marching in the streets and demanding change, campaigning for Perón's freedom and his leadership was very real and far more chaotic than even the movie portrays. But Perón's inner circle standing with Eva on a balcony and supporting her while she preached definitely did not happen, since they, as we already discussed, thought she should stay in bed. Later in the song, Eva meets up with Perón in jail and he once again states how he thinks they should give up and move away. Eva states that she can see where he's coming from, but that she wouldn't have been campaigning for him so relentlessly if she didn't think that they could win. For some reason, a myth exists that Eva campaigned for Perón by knocking on the door of every house in Buenos Aires and telling them to join the cause, but historians have stated that this did not happen and that the General Confederate of Labour was the driving force behind the rally. So I don't know where that story came from, but it doesn't seem to be true. During the song, Eva states that Perón resigned from the army to stand in support of the descamisados. I actually can't find where this claim comes from. I can't confirm it or deny it because I literally have nothing to back it up or to dismiss it, but to me it seems a really odd thing to say, and I'm not sure how it would help him in any way to do that. It wasn't Perón's military background that his opponents had issue with, it was him being involved in multiple coups and generally being a troublemaker. But anyway. The song ends with Shay making a reference to the long-standing electoral fraud that existed in Argentina, which had kept the conservative government in power for so long. I can't find anything that states whether or not there was electoral fraud in Juan's election, but considering the prevalence in Argentina for it, it's perhaps not too much of a stretch to assume that there was definitely some kind of fraud going on. It's said that between 250,000 and 350,000 people congregated in front of the Casa Rosada to demand Juan Perón's release. At 11 p.m, Juan stepped out onto the balcony of the Casa Rosada a free man, and the next day he announced that he would be running for president, and soon he would return to that very balcony, having won the election.